I have no use for age anymore. But I know I was 10 when it started. My mother came into my room to say goodnight as she always did, pulling the covers all the way up to my chin and tucking them around my miniature frame. A bear hug and a kiss on both cheeks. And a final reaffirmation that there's no one on this earth she could possibly love more than me. Our routine complete, she tugged the cord to my bedside lamp, extinguishing the stars that twinkled on its shade from the lit bulb, and followed the light spilling in from the hallway, pulling the door closed on her way out. Just before it clicked shut, she peered back over her shoulder, smiling at what I'm sure was a charming image, me, so innocent to the world and pure of heart, peering over the blanket to catch one final glimpse, to assure me she would see me in the morning. With those final words, the door would click shut, and I was surrendered to the darkness. It was in the stillness of that night, 10 years old, protected from the cold by my mother's warmth, it dawned on me that I would never again feel her embrace. I knew, without a doubt in my mind, that I had just seen my mother for the last time. Surely, I could fling off the covers my mother so purposefully wrapped me in, throw open the door and tear down the hall, shouting her name. I'd find her, most likely in her bedroom doing some light reading before she, too, turned in for the night. She'd console me, stroking my hair in such a way that would instantly put me at ease, before walking me back to bed, insisting that she would be just down the hall. But, in that moment, I found myself unable to move. An impossible cold had overtaken me, akin to the cold of a winter's night so dreadful it takes a scalding hot shower or hours entombed in blankets to fully return feeling to one's body. The feeling of never being warm again, even amidst the horrible realization I was unable to stave off the tide of sleep, my eyes growing heavier as I became colder, the weight of my sarcophagus of blankets betraying me to the point of suffocation. That night I dreamed of her. A vicious parade of what I somehow understood to be her memories, lies told, fights with loved ones, buried secrets, hateful looks, anything and everything, momentous or incidental alike. A carousel of the dregs of her subconscious, funneled directly to me in unrelenting succession. I awoke in the morning with a crushing weight in my chest, as if my mother had been relinquished of her transgressions and, in turn, the burden was forced into my own heart, free from my invisible bonds. I approached her room to find her laying peacefully in bed, her body cold. A social worker would later explain to me, very delicately, that a previously undetected problem with her heart had resulted in her sudden demise. But at least she passed in her sleep, they would say, as if a positive takeaway was even possible. The sentiment was appreciated, though it was lost on me as a child. Painlessly, in her sleep, why was she allowed to leave this world peacefully? With a young child in the wake of her passing, for years I tortured myself, unable to relinquish the darkness weighing down my heart. Endlessly I speculated how if maybe, just maybe, she was awake when it had happened, she would have thought of me. And maybe, just maybe, the thought of leaving her only child alone in this world might have kept her alive. But I'd felt it when she closed my door that night. I knew there was nothing to be done. That was the first time. In the beginning it was impossible to grapple with this new reality, compounded by the fact that I was alone in my curse. Or maybe there were others and, much like me, they were simply too afraid to talk about it. Either way, I was alone. But, as with all things, I settled into this new reality, continuing on as best I could. After a while it became predictable. Mostly after visiting elderly relatives, at least I could brace for the potential and the inevitable, which somehow began to offer the smallest shred of comfort. I learned quickly that not every experience was personal, though that didn't change what followed. The cold, the dreams, the memories, the sin, the weight, the death, the helplessness, each piece worked in tandem, each as bad as the last. Some were much worse, saying goodbye to a friend after a night out, dead from choking on their own vomit, a young child down the street working on his dribbling. They never caught the driver who hit him, and then, from that pain, being forced to relive the child's sins that very night, stealing Halloween candy when his friend wasn't looking, pulling the hair of a girl he had a crush on. It was enough to ruin me. I had no choice but to become completely desensitized, if only to find some way to cope with the reality of bearing witness. The worst was having to pretend I didn't know that I had already started to grieve when someone called to tell me the news, because the night before a dying soul bled their humanity out to me, that I'd exhausted my tears years ago thinking about how I could stop it from happening. If only I could pick up the phone or pound on their front door until they had no choice but to answer, that I knew how to save myself, but simply couldn't. I thought of my friends and family, random passers-by, even my mother, I thought of all of them, so fortunate to be blissfully unaware of our final parting while I absorbed their dormant sin. Would they believe me if I told them? Would they change their actions, cancel their plans, and wrap themselves in a sarcophagus of blankets until I no longer felt the cold in my heart? Would that even change the outcome? It was as if, in my final moment with them, the cold took it upon itself to absorb all of their negative energy, to leave them free of burden, free of sin, free of everything. But that weight could not be destroyed, only transferred to me. Eventually it became too much, and I gave up on any connection to the outside world. I had already made my plan, just as my mother had so many years before. I wanted to go peacefully in my sleep. I cut ties with my friends and family. And it was then I began to feel the cold. Only this time it was different. I was making the conscious decision that I would never see them again. For a brief moment, I was in control. The cold lingered as I prepared myself for what was to come. And for a week I slept, subjected to a ceaseless procession of everything those closest to me wanted to hide from the world. I emerged. My chest contracted from the weight inside. 100 lifetimes worth of pain added on top of an already unbearable mess. For the cold it must have been a feast. On the chosen day I stood in the bathroom and stared at the bottle of pills on the counter, assuring myself it was truly what I wanted. A glimpse of my reflection in the mirror repulsed me. My skin was nearly translucent, my face gaunt, the bags under my eyes deep. I felt empty. Everything left in me siphoned off by the cold to a rotting heart burdened with the affliction of others. I felt like a ghost, resigned to my fate. I reached for the bottle, still resting on the counter. At least, in my mind I did. No matter how hard I tried, my hand would not move. I stood there, white-knuckling the edge of the sink, gritting my teeth, tears blurring my vision as I cried for the first time in years. But I could not pick up the bottle. I looked in the mirror, for once in my life wishing more than anything that I would feel the cold again, that I could allow myself to die. I tried for what seemed like hours, but it would not come. In the wake of my inability to end my own life, as I collapsed into a crumpled heap on the floor of my bathroom, I realized the full extent of my curse. With the knowledge of my planned death, I had cut myself off from everyone, forcing myself to see them for the last time under the assumption it wouldn't matter when I was dead. But I lived on. When I was finally able to pull myself off of the floor, the tile greased with my sweat and tears, I knew there was nothing to be done. Too burdened by their weight, I could not pass on, no matter how much it pained me to remain. A heart too heavy to bear judgment could not be silenced, ever beating despite my wishes. This time, no one called. In fact, I surmised no one would ever call again. In my arrogance, I had foolishly believed I could control my power to free myself. But what came of it was more death than my soul could comprehend. I had removed myself from their lives, taking all pain and leaving them free of burden, free of sin, free of everything, free of me. I had prepared them for the afterlife. And now my job was complete. In that moment, trapped in the agony of oblivion, I wrestled with what led me to this moment. I thought of the relatives, the friends, the strangers whose foretold deaths I felt. I thought of everyone I let go of prematurely, believing it was a means to an end. I thought of a 10-year-old child, their mother kissing them on each cheek for what they would soon learn was the last time. And again I wondered if there were others like me, if they would ever find me, huddled on the bathroom tile, unable to die, or if they were doomed to suffer the same fate. I thought of my mother, and how glad I was she wasn't awake when she passed. I wondered what her last thought was before she went to sleep, unburdened by the knowledge that she'd never wake up, a fate I was not fortunate enough to receive. For here, in the darkness, I found that which I have denied myself for so long, fear. I had spent most of my life disconnected from most emotion to shoulder the weight. But with no end in sight, I was forced to realize that nothing could save me now. Fear is the only thing I have left as my heart beats on despite my wishes, unable to live or die. I sit perfectly still, heart too heavy to bear, praying for a final judgment that will never come. It's ... It's so hard to breathe. I have no idea how long it's been, or how old I am. All I know is I was 10 when it started. I hope her last thought was of me.